Physio Phil Bosma came on, and even then I told him I was fine. He helped me to my feet, wrote Terry Butcher years later. I thought it was easing, so I stamped my foot to check. Bad mistake. I knew then it was broken because I felt my tibia move. I collapsed to the floor again, and Middlebury Rangers' season collapsed with it. To discuss the winter of 87-88, I'm joined by Andy McGowan. How you doing, Andy?
I'm good, Martyn. Thanks for having me again.
Oh, my pleasure. And from Athens, it's John Cowden. How are we, John?
Fine, thank you. Glad to be back on.
So we have this midweek game, November 87. Not that long after that famous League Cup final, of course, and Rangers looking like they might recover. Europe's looking good. And we have this early injury to Terry Butcher. Were you both there? Was it immediately obvious, Andy, that this was serious?
I can't remember as the honest answer, but I think in the aftermath of the game, when we heard it was a broken leg, that you knew that this was a massive blow, because as we've spoken about Butcher's presence, far alone the Butcher the player, Butcher the captain was integral to the first season's success. So it kind of dawned on us that, you know, this is going to be a big problem for us, because he was a colossus for us to that point.
John, your memories of that night?
Yeah, it was a broken leg straight away. As I recall, it happened at the Broomlin, I think.
Yeah, it did, yeah.
We must have won the toss, because usually Aberdeen put his switches round, or was that just a season or two later? But as soon as it happened, I can't say I had a crack or whatever, but it just looked a bad one. And that one. And then, yeah, for all our upgrades in terms of training, or whatever you might call it, we could have done with a physio, I suppose, or a doctor, or one of those newfangled medical things. And we don't learn.
We don't. I mean, it's unfathomable that Terry Butcher was allowed to test that out by stamping his foot. It was unfathomable that he was not stretchered off, but just carried off by Borsma around the pitch, not even in a straight line off it. He'd receive an injection, of course, for the pain, but he said that every movement inside his leg and this kind of inflatable yellow sock that gets pumped up, he felt, you know, the bones moving. It was just excruciating, and he was sent to Ross Hall. And yeah, John, you're absolutely right. For all the modernisation that's happening at Ibrox, and there is, there's an old pals act with Bosma, and it would not be the final time we would see that kind of treatment of a serious injury. We'll talk about the game in a minute. I'm going to just put in a clip of Souness being interviewed the following morning at Ross Hall.
Obviously he's very upset, but it was an accident. He doesn't blame anybody. He's been in football long enough to realise that these things happen, and really his only aim now is to get himself ready as quickly as possible.
What's the degree of injury?
Well, he's fractured his tibia, which is his shin. The specialist feels that it'll knit itself without any surgery. So, and we're hopefully be ready for Europe, if not before. Our next round in Europe is March time, so hopefully he'll be back before then.
He's obviously very crucial to your plans. What kind of blows into the championship?
Terry, last year was possibly our most influential player, so we will miss him greatly this year, but you can talk about luck in football. I believe that luck evens itself out over a season. Hopefully it will for us. We've had a fairly traumatic period in the last few months, or even the last few weeks, and hopefully we can put them behind us and we can go on and get our game together and improve our league position.
Of course, after losing Terry, you went on to lose at Ibrox for the first time in a year last night. How does that dent your hopes for the championship?
Well, 2 points was immaterial last night. I mean, we'd like to have won, great, but losing Terry was more important, and that was sad. But we'll come back again. I mean, nobody will write off Rangers.
His words are bullish. I don't know if he sounds a wee bit bullish on the audio. On the video, you could almost see the eyes kind of well up at times. He knows that this is huge. This guy is totemic. It's a seismic moment of the season. He's already getting quite obsessed by injuries, John. Just in general, never seen anything like this. Don't see it in all these years at Liverpool. And for all the niggly ones, for all the silly ones, this is just a huge moment for Souness. And now Richard Gough, who was an exciting and expensive addition, has now become an expensive replacement. It's just not going to plan this season.
No, it's not. And let's face it, Gough isn't a replacement for Butcher, and neither is Roberts.
No.
Both of them are people that can play beside Butcher. But Butcher, I would argue at this point, is irreplaceable. And it's make do and mend. And yeah, we are picking out a lot of injuries. This one is beyond freakish. I think all the other ones, though, it's the beginning of a trend, is it not? And the trend is not our friend over the next 8, 10 years, 12 years. You just said about Boersma and everything, we get left behind. We just, for all, let's wear flip-flops, everything else, there is a fundamentals around doctors, physios, which we just miss, given the injuries we pick up almost from now onwards. And I think this was the time, maybe this season, maybe next. McCoy's was good. I think it was the next season. McCoy's was going to be back in 7 to 10 days for 3 months from a hamstring or something.
I'm glad that stopped.
Exactly. I mean, it is just one of those things and you're thinking, as you look back at it, to me, it was a phenomenal time. We know how the season ends, but actually, I don't think I would trade it for the world. That night was, you could see it, and you knew it was serious. I think you delude yourself and you say, right, get back by February, he'll be ready to play in the European Cup, because that is the only show in town, I would argue at this point. And it's the last time that we go into a last 8 where we can be considered potential winners. There's nobody there to run away with it. And we have, and you're deluding yourself and you're saying, well, hope Big Terry's back, because he is the linchpin.
He was talking about it as well,
player.
John. Yeah, I mean...
No, I read it in the papers. I can remember why, because I read it in the papers saying, this isn't a false memory. Everybody's talking, I'll get back, don't worry. And we all wanted to believe. I mean, football fans, you want to believe in miracles. Well, this wouldn't be a miracle, but you want to throw the 6-6s, but they're only been thrown at the other end of the city at this point, and would do for the rest of the season.
Because the initial prognosis was encouraging. I mean, it was the tibia, not the fibula, that had been broken. And Butcher himself was talking about making a return for maybe the second leg of the quarter-final against Stoya. Tireless work in Lilleshall, but it would be to no avail. The bone hadn't bonded well enough. It wasn't strong enough there was still a sign of a crack that just wouldn't withstand pressure in the end. And so his season was over. And according to a lot of fans of this vintage and the management, I mean, Smith says we were back to square one. That's why he felt this season was back to square one. Souness, when questioned about 87-88, talks about this as his immediate reference. In terms of domestic competition, was the feeling that this was the season over, Andy?
Again, my recollection is fuzzy because I'm a young pup, but I refer back to the fact that we knew Butcher was a colossus. John's mentioned that it was a linchpin. We knew it was an uphill struggle for there. I think our own hubris at that point probably prevented anybody from throwing in a towel that early, because when was that? That would have been about November time Butcher broke his leg. So still a lot of football to be played. So I think we knew the gravity of it. We probably, with hindsight, didn't realise or didn't admit it to ourselves how grave it was in terms of our chances. But, we had a good squad, and on paper, Butcher and Roberts, although John's exactly right that they weren't the replacements, and as time would tell, they weren't exactly gelled together themselves. But you've got Graham Roberts, you've got a £1.5 million signing for Spurs and Richard Gough, who we've coveted for a long time. So it's not as if you're sitting there saying, oh Christ, who's going to play centre-half? You've got two class players there that really, at any other given time, Rangers' recent history at that point, you would have bitten the arm off to have them. So there was reality, and then there was, well, can we cry about this because we've got two brilliant centre-halves still?
We do, and this is what I find interesting, because they're decorated players. There's experience there, but we've already seen a glimpse into what a Terry Butcher-less Rangers central defence looks like in that League Cup final. We talked about it last week with David and Alan, and it was dreadful. The two of them just do not make a good partnership, despite the individual talents that they both have and reputation. This would go on. Rangers lost 1-0 that night. A cheap Willie Miller free kick, not picked up. This would not be the last time that would be a feature of the season. I think Gough, captain of Spurs, when he's signed, is a little put out that Souness does not make him captain in place of Butcher. Souness says that he felt he needed to give it to Roberts because he didn't want to lose him. He thought that Roberts might go in a big huff and he would lose his second big English import in the space of a few weeks, so he felt kind of pressured to do that. So there was that. I don't think the two players got on. Gordon Watson, listener, sure everyone knows from New Zealand, shared on Twitter that he can remember very clearly a picture and shoot of Gough and Roberts sharing. I wouldn't say sharing pleasantries. They were pretty much having an argument whilst playing for Spurs. Now that happens in every football pitch and dressing room. I get that, but I don't think the two got on as people, and they certainly did not go on as centre halves, which was weird. As I said, Gough did Roberts did a fair job coming in as a stand-in leader, and Gough had obviously going to be one of the most decorated captains of all time, but this just did not work. The response was all right. John, just 1 point dropped in the next 8. Kind of careless 2-2 draw at home to Dunfermline. Those don't get any easier with time. Good wins away at Hibs and Motherwell, as well as victories over Dundee United and the early league leaders, which were Hearts at Ibrox. The last of those two, a very entertaining 3-2 win. The day before that, Ian Durrant turned up at training to find Ray Wilkins standing in the dressing room. Thinking, God, how many midfielders is this guy going to bring in? I think at training he tried to absolutely drill as fast a pass as he possibly could just to test him out, and he immediately trapped it and immediately showed that control. Memories of the signing of Wilkins? I know someone coming to the end of their career, but classy player.
Yeah, and I think it's what we needed. My mind is that we have Durrant and Derek Ferguson, so we have a young, virile almost midfield, and we need, in my opinion, and I think a few others, we need what would you say? We need a bit of stability, a bit of experience, which really Souness in Scotland, I would argue, isn't doing it. In Europe, he looks a lot more at the part, but in the Scottish terms, I don't know, it's just not quite right. Wilkins is the kind of signing that you can slot into that team because you have that youthful midfield, and we still have quite a young team. It's there and exciting. It's another glamour. England international. He was playing as recently as in the World Cup '86 when he got sent off for throwing the ball at the ref, I think. So he's a bit passionate. Chelsea, Man U, brings all that sort of continental flavour. It is what we needed. People say, "Oh, another midfielder." I don't recall us having a real riches of midfield players. I don't think we're signing policy really until this The summer was awful because we didn't sign much, but we were buying a lot of junior players. The signings he makes from November, December, January are absolutely top notch.
Yeah.
Despite the fact I didn't want John Brown because I hated him. But that aside, when you look at who he signs and the service they gave us, they're fantastic. Absolutely. And Wilkins is the kind of guy to get in for those couple of years, as it turned out. And he had it all. Only thing was, could you play Wilkins and Souness in the same midfield? Hindsight would say no. At the time, I don't think any of us thought Souness could do anything wrong, but probably get quite a bit wrong this season.
Yeah, well, we've already covered a wee bit of that. We will go on again. Andy, your thoughts or memories in the signing of Wilkins? I remember going. I don't know if you attended Alan McLaren's testimonial many years later, and Wilkins played, and he was the best passer of the ball on the park. He was retired, long retired, but there was just an absolute class about him. He would go on, even though he's only there for 2 years. He got us, and we got him, I think. But your memories of that, because again, we talked in the summer show. Trevor Francis, John McGregor, Avi Cohen, these are old friends, older guys coming at the end of their career. On paper, does Wilkins not kind of fit this thing of kind of veteran English or English-based player? Is this still the same kind of signing policy?
100%. So Wilkins was kind of out of sight, out of mind, because he's playing for Paris Saint-Germain, who are not the Paris Saint-Germain we know nowadays. And he was 32, I think. So at that time of football, 32, 33 was the twilight. You weren't getting, the advent of Gordon Strachan's bananas and playing to 38 hadn't actually came through by that point. So he's a very, very much a veteran. He's probably an ex-England player at that point, very much. And you're right, 100%, Martin. It was viewed, as far as I can recall, exactly the same categorisation as Trevor Francis in particular, i.e. a player end his career, past his best, no longer an England player, one as soon as his buddies or a peer, if you like. And he came in without that much fanfare. It was kind of left field. Very, very quickly we realised, this guy's far, far better than what we imagined, because I think we were taken aback by his bite in the tackle and his ball winning abilities, which we always thought that coming into the Scottish game he might be, a cultured player like him might find it a bit rough and tumble. Anything but. He revelled in it. So that was my recollection. And John's right. The midfield at that point, Dean Ferguson was really a striker. He wasn't really a midfielder. He was a forward midfield player. And you'd players like Davy Kirkwood would signed, and the midfield wasn't as strong as we might recall. It definitely wasn't. No. So, interesting signing. It's actually a masterstroke when you think about it now.
Oh, definitely. It was the first of a few. We'll get to the ins and outs of this transfer business in a wee while, because it is so interesting. You get 5 players, really, Wilkins being the second, Goff being the first, and 3 more to come, that served the club very well, even if they were just here for 2 years or for the whole duration of this kind of project. And if they'd all been there in the summer, maybe this season would have been a bit different. But we'll come to it. As I said, the response to the Aberdeen game is decent, and these kind of superficial similarities with 86, 87 are there. Going into the new year Old Firm game, 5 points behind with a game in hand, as we were before. But those stats are just a kind of eerie quirk. Rangers were at full strength the year before. In addition to the obvious loss this time of Butcher, Derek Ferguson was missing. Cooper started the game in New Year but was unfit, came off after 26 minutes. Chris Woods had to go off in the second half with a broken rib. Souness, who was imperious, as we mentioned, in New Year 1987, was a shadow on this occasion. He gave the ball away twice in the first half, could have easily led to Celtic goals. And this match was to be played, of course, at Parkhead, where Rangers had not won since 1980. It was quite predictable, I think. Overwhelmed from the off, 2 goals either side of half time from Frank McAvenny. The second, of course, a header past Graham Roberts, who was in goal again for Rangers. And again, it's possible that Souness's own frustration with his own play, his own situation as a player was externalised in the dressing room. McCoy wrote years later that we lost 2-0, but we were fortunate to escape with just that. It was a shocking performance. I hadn't played well, the team hadn't played well, and Souness was not a happy man. I was soon receiving the sharp end of his tongue. You were the worst man out there, he barked at me. No, I wasn't, I hit back. You were. Well, I've never seen him so angry, and he'd every right to be. I shouldn't have said that. I was so sick of the way the game had gone, I just couldn't bite my tongue. The manager and Walter Smith tore my game to shreds, and I was left to reflect that sometimes silence is golden. John, were you at Parkhead that day? We'll come to the other issue in a moment, but the performance kind of typifies where this Rangers team kind of was. It was really, really poor. What I want to ask was, is that how you kind of foresaw it? Did you expect what we got that day?
I don't know if we expected, but as it unrolled or played out, it was kind of like that old story, which had seen, and in a weird way, really up until 89, most of the performances at Parkhead under Souness were insipid in a way that they weren't as bad under Wallace or Gregg. And that was probably the one game where we did regrets. And Souness's record as a Rangers player at this point is in Old Firm matches is beginning to be dreadful. You know, he starts off on that high, and it's noticeable that we lose 3 times to them that season. Butcher doesn't play in any one of them. Butcher is more a talisman, and I think these games are really beginning, or they are, not even think, you can see, are really bypassing Souness in the midfield. You can't carry passengers. They're rocket fueled at the moment. They are on their happy birthday, dear Selleck, or whatever.
Yeah.
Thought birthday was a day, but seems it can last for a whole year or whatever. And they're on one of those mad runs that they go on, and they're just an emotional club. And when it hits the heights, it flies. But you know they're not far away from absolute car crash territory, and invariably it ends up there. So you're looking at it, and I mean, we're still in the league race even after this, because I think they drop points after it, but it's just not. There's a little bit missing, and I will be honest, I think it's on the European Cup on both sides of the city. They want to win the league or whatever for their centenary, but they are watching us in the European Cup thinking, no matter what we do in this league, if they win the European Cup, that is going to be disastrous. So everybody's looking at it on that level. And I'll be honest, as a fan, I would give them the league that year if we had a real crack at the European Cup. Because you're looking at the two squads on paper, you're so far ahead of them, all these signings. There is no chance. And they've thrown every bit of money. They've actually become spenders. But, I mean, they spent a fortune. They get McAvenny, good sign. They spent almost as much on Joe Miller.
Yeah.
You know, whereas, and you're looking at who they bought.
But they had a big influx in the summer.
How long they lasted.
Yeah, to be fair, they had a big windfall that summer with all those players going. Maybe not as much as they would have liked.
Miller takes them into actual spending territory, though. Up till then, they were used
Net
car
spend,
salesmen. Then it goes. But our signings, if you look at it that year, and we're talking the 5 we're just about to go into, against the ones they signed, the longevity in the class, doesn't take long for them to bed in and show, you know, quality count. And you know they ain't spending any more money, because that would require them to go public, get overdraft facilities, all of these nonsensical things that the Kelly Whites, etc., are just like, it's not happening.
Yeah.
You know, we are custodians of this club. It's disappointing. You go away from Parkhead and you're disappointed, but there still is this thing of the European Cup, and you're one of 8 possibilities in it.
Yeah. Shouldn't be
And that's
forgotten
the
that
last
we.
time
Yeah,
you go into it.
yeah, we were the unofficial British champions. It should be remembered. Won the Dubai Challenge Cup against Everton, who were champions of England that winter. 2-2. Fleck and McCoy had scored, and then Rangers won 8-7 in penalty. So it's not all bad. But that Parkhead performance was horrific. But however bleak the league aspirations now look, 7 points behind with a game in hand. Shamefully, it wasn't even the worst part about that day. The Rangers bus that took that short journey to the East End that day had a new signing on board who was just about to be pitched in to make the most hostile debut imaginable. In order to pass the time, Mark Walters flicked through the newspapers where he found a message just for him. It was a Celtic fan pictured with a box of fruit with the accompanying message, "This is for Mark." Incredible stuff. Mark Walters in his autobiography said the reality was that this clown had spent 30 quid in fruit just to throw at me. Instead of feeding his family, he'd spent all that money on boxes of bananas to throw at a black guy. Walters was the first black player to play in the Scottish Premier Division, and the reception he got at Parkhead was, febrile. Boos echoed around the ground from his first touch to his last, and then the bananas and much worse was thrown whenever he took his place on the left wing. The coverage of it on BBC Scotland was remarkably silent. Let's just have a listen now.
Well, the game was slightly held up while some assortment of fruit was removed from the pitch. You can see it there, just in front of the jungle. And off we go into the second half.
So BBC Scotland showed the bananas, and Archie McPherson, you heard, just merely commenting that, second half slightly held up while some assortment of fruit was removed from the pitch. Doesn't provide the context, despite the context being obvious. Now, McPherson only last year, 2021, has apologised for that, apologised for failing to grasp the racial significance, but I don't know how he possibly could have. Bananas were thrown in England at that time for that reason. This was commonplace. It was literally in the papers that day that Walters was going to be the target of that. A few weeks later, it would happen again at Tynecastle. We'll talk about that in a minute, but McPherson in those days had a piece to camera at the end of Sportscene at the ground that he was at, talking about that game, but talking about the other games in the state of play. Doesn't mention a thing at Parkhead, but at Tynecastle, when the same happens, he has that appeal to, wind your neck in, this is disgraceful, etc., etc. He just can, Andy, countenance the fact that Celtic, this club that he thinks about in quite a romantic way, very inclusive, very progressive is what we call it now, could ever be capable of that. It just doesn't seem to be able to cross his mind. It's a remarkable piece of journalism, and not in a good way. It lacks courage.
To look back on it now, it's utterly mind-blowing, but it kind of encapsulates where not just Scotland, but British culture was at that point in time. I've always said that Scotland is probably more racist, casually racist, than I'll ever admit to, and I think that still stands true. But even then, at that point in time, had I seen a black man walk down the street in my town? Never. Did I have a black person at my school? No. At Pakistanis, maybe 2 or 3, that was it. So to see a black man in Scottish football was a novelty in the first sense. But to see him playing for Rangers, you kind of, we instantly took to him because he was a fantastic player, and you could see him from the first moment he touched the ball in the Rangers jersey. He was a sensational talent. But what happened that day was something that, what kind of humanity would you have to be to not realise what it stood for? And you're right, there was a kind of revision, an instant revision of, it was just all firm, I wouldn't say banter, but it was just part of that febrile atmosphere, as you've said. It was utterly unacceptable. It was shameful. It's embarrassing to this day. I'll tell you what's more embarrassing to this day, the fact that some folks still want to call out the fact that Celtic fans committed that atrocity, because they kind of write over that and go straight to Tynecastle. Hearts get the hard end of the stick with that one, because they go to Tynecastle, because it was repeated, a week later? Was it the next game?
A couple of weeks later, yeah.
So I remember it vividly. I remember at the time, the notion of racism and what we know as racism nowadays wasn't the same, but I knew it wasn't right. I felt very, very defensive of Mark Walters. the Rangers fans did as well. They made that clear. It's just a sorry episode in Scottish football, and I think the treatment of it since then has been equally bad. There is the BBC documentary that Mark Walters made a matter of months ago, which I watched with interest, and I thought it was actually very, very good, and I thought it shone a light on it once again, and kind of put it to bed and put it on record as to what actually happened then. But interesting you say about Archie McPherson's piece to camera. I thought that was after the Celtic game, and actually you've just put me right to say it was the Hearts game.
Yeah, it's incredible. Even the papers kind of downplayed it. Only a few stupid fans greeted him with chants and fruit throwing, one report said. The Sunday Mail had a 6-sentence piece on it, which attributed the fruit and monkey chants to a handful of childish fans. The acoustics at Parkhead must be absolutely sensational in that case. Days later, after that 6-sentence piece on it, the Sunday Mail had column inches galore on what Rangers players earned. This was a bigger disgrace or a bigger topic of conversation. Let's not kid ourselves. There were issues at home. Walters played his first game at Ibrox. He writes and still talks about the general warm response that he received. He set up 2 goals in a 3-0 win over Martyn. But even then, the Rangers fan removed, banned for life for racial abuse before the 16th of January, and the trip to Tynecastle really kind of brought it to the fore. And John, presuming you were at Parkhead that day, Tynecastle a few weeks later, your recollections of the response from our support, we'll get to Walters the player in a minute, which is really the story that you would like to hold on to, because his impact was pretty much immediate. But the kind of racial tolerance from our support, what your recollections of that?
Okay, it was there. It was highly supportive. Let's be honest, if the boot had been in the other foot, there would have been elements within our support which would have reacted similarly. It'd be naive and stupid to say otherwise. However, history shows that A, we get called out on it, and B, we tend to take action. And what I remember speaking to a Hearts fan after years later, and he was going on about how ashamed he was, as a Hearts supporter, it happened. And I said, but you weren't the first, and it was equally as bad in his first match. And this guy was like, but that was his first match playing us. And I was like, no, it wasn't. And he said, who did you play? I said, we played Celtic at Parkhead. And he was a Hearts season ticket holder. They get away with murder. I mean, some things in life don't change. Their management of the media since Steen arrived in '65 is Pravda-esque. It is stunning. And for Archie McPherson to say, I didn't notice, oh dear, I'm sorry, that's just not wearable. He knew exactly what it was, but this romanticised version of Celtic, a club for all, again is shot through, because it's not. It was an absolute disgrace that day at Parkhead. I don't think we could believe it in the Rangers end. You expect maybe a little bit, but the sheer quantity, it was unbelievable. It was as bad at Hearts. Defending Hearts in any way, but they get hung out to dry. And in a weird way, you would say, well, actually, it happened 2 weeks before and nobody cracked a light. So there was almost a sense of carry on, boys, and have a go, because this is what's acceptable in Scottish football. Which it shouldn't be and should never be. But nobody calls it out. I mean, I read all the papers again. It's exactly how I remembered it. Rangers are overpaid, they're very good. That call there was one about, there wasn't any banana left in any fruit shops in the Gallagher. And it was said as like a joke.
Yeah, well, the original piece.
It was a joke.
Yeah, it was. Now, Walters
there's nobody coming out and saying that this is wrong. Is this 20th century Scotland? Oz like us.
Until Tynecastle. And then you get the Evening Times an editorial at burn suppers up and down the country just now. Scots are extolling the brotherhood of man, yet Yobbo's unfit to lace his boots pillory Walters because of the colour of his skin. They weren't doing that a couple of weeks before. Walters expected the fruit, but you get a pig's foot, you get darts, you get golf balls. I mean, it was just horrendous. He wasn't. Should he have really been thrown in to make his debut in that game? Probably not. He signed on Hogmanay. He signed literally the day before. £500,000. We've spent £250,000 on Ray Wilkins the month before that. I do remember at my age, I'm 6 going on 7 that season. I'm taking my cue from my dad, but he was quite excited about the Walters signing. With Wilkins, probably, and especially Walters, I guess, that outright creativity, the first time that Souness had really invested in outright creativity. Possibly seeing a succession plan there for Cooper, I guess, in that way. But he wasn't particularly good at Parkhead, but he was superb at Tynecastle. 1-1 draw, that taking the ball out the sky from Nicky Walker, the double shuffle, Andy. Hugh Burns got an absolute chasing that day, and I think he let himself down badly in some of the kind of language that he used. Walters, the player, was taken to the hearts of Rangers fans pretty quickly.
He certainly was. The double shuffle. I mean, it's crazy to think back now when you've got centre halves that do a double shuffle, just the way football is going. Technically, that it blew our minds. It was like it was for a different planet. And that double shuffle in particular just had everybody talking about him. Everybody in Scottish football was talking about Mark Walters, the way he could get past players in that magical shimmy. The Rangers fans knew straight away what we had. It was something different. It was absolute dynamite, sensational, all those kind of adjectives. And you didn't have a wall-to-wall coverage of English football, so it's not as if he was on a radar. Probably a good thing for Rangers at that point in time, actually, that was the case. But obviously, Souness knew the English market. Aston Villa were still a big team. And we'd done very well to get him for, what did you say, about 550,000, something like that?
500 grand.
Which was a lot of money at that. 500 grand. A lot of money at that time. But it was worth every penny. Brilliant player. One of my favourite Rangers players. And you're right, it was with one eye on David Cooper, kind of disappearing over into the sunset in one way or another.
So the league is a remote possibility, I think, for being kind after New Year. John, you've mentioned quite clearly that the European Cup is really the big talking point this season. But now Rangers really are spending money. In January, John Brown came from Dundee for 350,000. You said you didn't like him, but he was a bit of a problem for Rangers, and Rangers have a tendency to sign players that are a problem for them. Jan Bartram turned up for 180,000 from Denmark, and then eventually, after about 3 months of brinksmanship and kind of soap opera drama, Souness did what he promised he wouldn't do in the summer by paying big money to a Scottish club. When Ian Ferguson finally realised that life ambition by signing from St Mirren for £800,000. Hero of that 87 Scottish Cup final, John. I guess he promised more dynamism, bit of skill in the middle of the park, genuine goal threat from deep. Gough, Walters, Wilkins, mid-season opportunism, but I guess Ferguson and Brown could have been done in the summer. Bit more long-term thinking, same money or similar money, provide a bit more depth in defence and midfield. But was this Souness just? Remember what he said in the summer? He's not entertaining Scottish clubs, not paying over the odds. Well, he eventually paid the same money he would have to, but it was too late for this season.
Yeah, Brown would have been a useful addition. I didn't like Brown because not the fact he played out skin against them. I have no issues with that. It was the running and giving us the V's and everything when he did it, which I refused to be convinced that it was a blue nose. To be honest, Den's part was the thing. Ferguson, Ferguson I would argue, he has things, but I think he take a year, maybe two, to really settle into that team.
He takes a while.
He wasn't one for that season. He does take a while.
Yeah.
So even if we'd signed him in the summer, not convinced he would have been as impactful as we would have liked in that year, because I think, is it Alan, maybe going back to Alec McDonald 60, I think he was almost overawed at living the dream, coming in, because he was 21.
But we don't know that, John. We don't know that time.
No, we don't.
So in the summer of '87,
he doesn't really do it a bit.
Yeah, but in the summer of '87, the boy who a real hot prospect in Scottish football, he scored the win in the Scottish Cup final, gives us something a wee bit more further forward in theory, and it would happen. But you're right, eventually, because it takes a while for Fergie to settle down. This should be done this summer.
I would argue Wilkins should have been done this summer. I know there's opportunism and
that came up. That came up in Paris.
But I mean, the other thing that comes in is, never mind the summer. If you're going hell for leather for this European Cup,
done before October,
you do it before the deadline, and everybody knows when the deadline is. It's around the end of November, and we sign 4 players after the end of November, or 3 that we cannot play. Who would have been crucial? Walters, Ferguson, and Brown would have been. Well, Ferguson, given our striking issues, which would arise, and because transfer wasn't just one way, it was both ways. A striker or someone who at least attack-minded for a European away game would have been a bit of a bonus, because we run into problems there of our own making to a degree. One of them don't. So you look at it, and Ferguson, as it's saying, goes for 3 months. And I'm reading it in November, and I'm saying, and the deadline's coming up, and you're like, sign this guy. Just sign him. And I don't think actually we bid any more money. It is one of the weirdest transfer sagas that I've seen. Yeah, I think there is 800,000 in November, and we still pay 800,000 in January.
I know. And I still think there's something in this. Soon it's just been pissed off from the Richard Gough summer of '86 thing, and seemed hell bent on just not dealing with Scottish clubs. But eventually you have to. They would all, as I said, leave a real mark. Bartram excluded, but we'll get to that in the next show. But I guess it was the players who left Ibrox during that winter that create the real questions as we look back, guys. Just 9 goals in 4 months. Soonest decided he'd seen enough of Mark Falco to know that he wasn't going to fill that Hately shaped hole in his heart. He was sold to QPR in early December, and feeling 2 weeks later saw the loss of another striker that was maybe arguably more considerably damaging. Speculation about Robert Fleck's future had been rumbling on for ages, and certainly recently, just a month, whilst he was scoring 5 goals in 8 league games. But with the departure of Falco, all that looked settled. Rangers surely we're not going to sell 2 of them. 15th of December, before Rangers threw that silly point away at home to Dunfermline, Fleck told the Evening Times that all that transfer stuff is firmly behind me, and I'm sure I can go on from here and score a few more. I have re-established the partnership with Ali, and there's more to come. The following day's Evening Times headline read, "Why Fleck had to go," as he finalised a £600,000 transfer to Norwich City. Graham Souness has been very clear on this. Wasn't his intention to offer them a new deal worth more than Norwich could match personally, but Fleck wanted to leave Glasgow, not Glasgow Rangers, for personal reasons, and he insisted it was best for everyone if he went. Problem now is, as John's mentioned, the European Cup returned in March. Rangers have 1 striker on the books. Ali McCoy's being that, the only one kind of registered to play. Even if they sign 3 new forwards the next day, they wouldn't be registered to play for March. Soonest received a lot of criticism for this, boys, for creating that exposure. Falco played well. He scored in the 2 rounds before. Probably fair to say that was an unnecessary risk, Andy. But his hands were tied with Fleck. He was going for other reasons, and given that Rangers were prepared to sell him a year before to Dundee for 20 grand, £600,000 was undeniably good business. I guess it's just the Falco one. Even if Souness didn't quite fancy him long term, like he did with McPherson the season before, hang on, because he's kind of done the biz in Europe.
Falco wasn't the answer, but it was. I know it's easy to say better than nothing, but he contributed to the Kiev victory. He gave us something different to McCoy's, because obviously as soon as he was craving this target man, the Hateley as you call it. So to sell him at that point of the season when you're still in the mix for the European Cup, and especially was folly. And what was more surprising at that point was that we didn't do anything about it, because I don't think Fleck's issues just happened overnight. I think, as you quite rightly said, it was because he wanted to leave Glasgow. That's not something that happened in the space of a week. And given the fact there's no transfer window, we hadn't done anything about it. There was no forward planning there was no contingency, which speaks of the times then, right? It's no like director of football and football departments and scouting systems and all this kind of stuff that we've got in modern football now. It's more the manager deciding who he wants as a player, wasn't it? So it was a big mistake. I mean, you look back at that season in its totality, and especially the European Cup, because I'm sure we'll come on to the Stour game and McCoy's part of that. It was a massive mistake to have more than that on the books when we were dipping in fairly significant markets with big money for Walters and Goff, for example. So it kind of, looking back on it, is weirder than it seemed at the time. Fleck was a loss because he was well, we seen what he'd done when he went down to England. He became a really fantastic, powerful striker.
John, your thoughts on that? I mean, it's been debated a lot, but Fleck was kind of outside of Souness's control. But Falco seems the odd one, even just to hang on to him for a few months.
Fleck happen, these things happen. And if that was the only one or whatever, it does. Why he left himself exposed? Falco wasn't a bad player, wasn't a great player. I think his strike record was 9-10 goals in 20 games. He gave you something else that was an attacking body, not just for Europe, but generally. It meant you didn't have to sacrifice Durant, but definitely in Europe. So this season, it's one of the best in many ways in terms of the feeling, which I know you guys are going to go, because you're looking at it as the 12 years, and this is probably one of the worst 2 of those 12. As I said before the show, it's one of the best 2 in the last 10 years that coming into it, and we're still, we're not out. If we compared to previous years, we ain't out the title race here in January, and really we're not out until they beat us at Ibrox, which you'll cover, I'm sure, in the next one. It is the last time that we go into Europe and we get into the last 8, and we aren't looking at, I keep saying it, we aren't looking at anybody saying, avoid them, miss that. We are a contender. And we don't let, this is the high watermark in European terms for Graham Souness. You might even say for that whole era, because as we'll come on to 92-93, there's Marseille, who were never better, and after them there is this, this team called Milan to beat. Whereas this year, there are good teams there. They aren't miles ahead of us. You aren't fearing anybody. You've put it out. And to leave yourself exposed in that way, it's just bad management. If somebody breaks a leg, a la Butcher, and then Fleck has to go, I wouldn't say it's luck. That is out with his control. Yeah. This is absolutely in his control. And you don't know what he's thinking is. You really don't, because he didn't fancy McPherson, but he didn't throw him away the previous season or drop him or whatever. He kept him in.
But he's all over the place, though. Again, we're not dealing with a manager who seems to be exhibiting a lot of cool, composed control, strategic decision making. We've seen it previously. We will see it again.
Well, I've got a question here, just as it's coming up. Do you think that one of the issues he has is that he has to take more responsibility on the park with Butcher not being there?
Yes.
Whereas in the previous season and the succeeding season, actually, Butcher is the leader on the park.
Yeah.
Never mind who's the manager. Butcher leads that team in a way that, if somebody breaks a leg, a la Butcher, and then Fleck has to go, I wouldn't say it's luck. That is out with his control. This is absolutely in his control. And you don't know what he's thinking is. You really don't, because he didn't fancy McPherson, but he didn't throw him away the previous season or drop him or whatever. He kept him in.
But he's all over the place, though. Again, we're not dealing with a manager who seems to be exhibiting a lot of cool, composed control, strategic decision making. We've seen it previously. We will see it again.
Goff or Roberts don't at that point.
I think you're
they're imposing figures.
I think you're absolutely right, John.
Of that team.
He's playing too often, and it's no coincidence that for the next 2 seasons, Souness is a registered player. I think he plays 30 times in 2 seasons, so many from the bench. More detachment from the playing thing means more control as a manager in terms of decision making and just overall perspective. So totally think you're right. I think it's a great point that he will instinctively feel the need to be, Graham Souness leader legend kind of thing, because his guy on the park is no longer on the park, but it's just yet more chaos in a kind of chaotic season. Again, the response to the New Year defeat's not bad. That draw at Tynecastle, 1 point dropped in 7 league games. You're getting a wee bit of last year's quality, hammering a Martyn, St Mirren at Ibrox, and John, a rarely spotted win away to Aberdeen. 2-1 victory there on 6th of February.
Yep.
Again,
great performance up until we gave away the penalty.
Well, strengths and weaknesses, isn't it?
Typically Aberdeen.
Yeah, strengths and weaknesses. You get predatory instincts of McCoy's, aerial prowess of Goff. Rangers get a 2-0 lead within 35 minutes. But then Goff sees the red card and Aberdeen come back into it, and it's a kind of almighty rear guard that's required to kind of see it out. Title's not entirely over. Celtic are 3 ahead with a game in hand. There's an Old Firm game to come at Ibrox. Uphill struggle, but it's one that involves Aberdeen and Hearts. So, you've got teams in the mix. So it's not completely done yet. If the league form wasn't the same as the previous season by this point, sadly the Scottish Cup form was. Raith Rovers were the first team to be drawn. That game took a while to get played. It was 0-0 in Kirkcaldy. Rangers hanging on, to be honest, for much of that game. 4-1. Routine win on paper in the Ibrox replay. It was 1-1 with 40 minutes to go, and then the floodgates kind of opened. So Dunfermline would lay in wait. Gentlemen, 20th of February. Been good opponents for Rangers that season. 3 wins and a draw. 4 goals been scored in each of those victories. Quite a generous opponent. But Dave McKellar's in goal again, who was in goal, of course, for Hamilton Accies the previous season. Dunfermline were ahead after only 5 minutes. A bit of a freak goal. Former Celtic winner Mark Smith beat Bartram down the right hand side. And before the ball could kind of bobble out of play, he just swings in this high looping cross. Chris Woods, not long back from his rib injury, should have done better, but it kind of sails over his head into the corner. And like that Hamilton game, Rangers bombard Dunfermline, Roberts, Durant, Goff going close. But again, this pressure being exerted, Rangers do not respond, and it's John Brown that's sent off for a needless off-the-ball charge on Smith before half-time. 12th red card, and in Souness's 18-month reign. It would take 4 years for Rangers to chalk up that number again. There would be another goal, quite a clever John Watson corner. Rangers toil. Richard Goff was up front, for Christ's sake. So we're out of the cup before the clock's changed again. But I think this, as I said before with the red card thing, this probably does draw the line. The disciplinary record before is appalling, but Souness has got this in his mind. We need to win this fight. We need to be physical first. Now he's starting to buy more creative players. Again, I don't think it's any coincidence that we take so long to get anywhere near that kind of number of red cards again.
There was a problem with discipline, there's no question about it, and looking back in it, and even at the time, I suppose there was a large slice of the team playing in the image of the manager, and that cynical professionalism that he showed at times was kind of pressured onto the team. I think he signed players like John Brown because he liked them, he admired them because he saw he selling them. Done it with Terry Hurlock as well, possibly Graham Roberts. He liked that nasty streak through a player. But the discipline was becoming an issue. As you say, the numbers there were quite staggering. And it was impacting our ability to fulfil what we needed to do on the park. It was compromising everything. And I remember at that time there being a lot of chat around it and why it was the case, what they needed to do to counter it. There was the mix, and the mix was the SFA kind of relationship as well. Soonest wasn't exactly pally with referees, and if you think it's bad now, listeners, in terms of refereeing and the relationship with the SFA, then it was worse then, wasn't it? It was quite open warfare, really, and it was personal. It was personal between Soonest and the authorities. So all this was going on, but bottom line was discipline was shit. And I think looking back now, Soonest carried the can for that, because it was him that was sending his team out. And whether it was explicit, implicit, the team were carrying out what he wanted to do, which was, possibly win at all costs.
I put a counterpoint to that, and actually, I think it's a necessity of getting to that point that you're going to have a bad disciplinary record in the early days, because we were soft touches, rather like Gerrard's.
Yes, well, this is the. I've made this.
You have to go out and you have to go over the top.
You need to win the war.
Maybe
first.
not as much as we did. You have to go out and say, we're no longer lightweight Rangers.
Yeah.
We're serious. And once you get to the top, you see this probably with golf, you do begin, and I mean later years, you do get refereed to a different standard again.
Yeah.
When you're the challenger, you attract a lot more. See what happens going forward. But in the 90s, golf gets away with a lot that you wouldn't get away with in this period. But I do think maybe it was OTT. Soonest was definitely OTT. I do think you have to attract you're going to get a certain amount of sending offs, because you have to show we are not soft touches.
But we go back to Easter Road, that very first game. Yes. He makes no apologies. He apologised for himself. He let his team down, but I think that's just playing the game. He never blames his players for getting involved. Even Pataudry winning the league, he was a bit sheepish by putting his team in that position. But he said, Rangers will not be trampled on. I will not allow this Rangers team to be trampled on. We will, and that's not going to change. Well, it kind of does. Because I agree with you, John, and the Gerrard comparison is one I've made a few times in the past few years. You have to win that war first. You have to win the fight first before you can play, and that's really what's happened here. But there's a definite change here or around this time with the players he's signing, the type of players he's signing, more creative, more technical players. That it's going to be different, because you cannot have sustained success with players sitting in the stand. Can he do it? But you're absolutely right. A message has to be sent out. We'll leave it there, boy. Oh, just before we do, John, can you that shambles at Dunfermline? Yet again, the cup being just this utter hoodoo. Were you there? Memories of that?
Yeah, it was a jam-packed crowd. I can't even. There might have been tickets, but it was super full. There was real anger about Brown getting sent off, given the context of the day and how it happened. I mean, Ferguson, the ref, Mr. Bojangles, was always a bit of a playboy. But it was quite unusual for linesmen to get involved like that in those kind of incidents. Again, it shouldn't have done it, but did feel it was good. It felt like one of those seasons, because we were really now getting into the point where it was play until you score at Parkhead. And they were scoring a lot of late winners and doing a lot. On the counter side, I think for me the Scottish Cup, I always had it as a Tim's tournament. But I mean, under Greg, every year under Greg we got to the Cup final. We were dreadful in the league by and large, almost always. And therefore, it was just one of those things that happened. It was really disappointing. But we're still sitting at this point. We aren't out of the league, because they've still got to come to Ibrox. Yeah, they're 3+ a game, but you're thinking teams can beat each other at this point. As you say, Hearts, Aberdeen are in the mix. The United are capable of taking points. So it's not as if 3 points when it's 2 points for a win or whatever, and you've still to play them in a 44-game league is miles away. They've got to go to Ibrox, they've got to go to Tynecastle, and we have this winnable European quarterfinals. It is, for me, we expect. I want Rangers to be dominant in Scotland, but that's not where it stops. I want us to be genuinely competitive and to win a European trophy.
Yeah.
And this is one of those seasons where, I'm not saying it should, but it could have happened. And it's a fantastic feeling. You're also looking at our squad, and they're not gelling quite yet. We're on paper and actually on the pitch, when you see some of the things, they haven't gelled completely. We're miles ahead of anything else in Scotland. That is not that there's poor teams in Scotland or poor players. I don't mean that. But you run through who we've signed and the squad we have at the moment. It is, Woods, Butcher, Roberts, the Goff, then you're Souness, Wilkins, Durrant, Ferguson, McCoy's, Cooper, Walters. This is one of our best squads going into the season after that probably we've ever had in relative context at any time. As a squad, we've had better players individually. As a collective squad, there aren't too many weaknesses.
No, there definitely is not. John and Andy, you'll be back in a couple of weeks to discuss that summer of 1988 and really the start of this period of real dominance. And you've set it out there quite nicely, John. The players were ready. It would just take a wee while to get them all going. But thank you for shepherding us through difficult waters that is 87-88. Thank you for your shift. Thanks, John.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Andy.
Thanks again, Martyn. Thanks, John.
It was August the 12th, 1987, when Robert Fleck scored for Rangers in a 2-0 win over Hibs, the last Rangers striker not named McCoist to score until August of 1988. The responsibility for firepower firmly placed at McCoist's feet, and with Europe coming back around the corner, what could possibly go wrong? Until next week, bye for now.